If memories were meant to be veiled in mists of secrecy, nobody would ever see the tales that we could weave. For we imagined we would fly to sunset clouds across the sky. All we ever did was try and lived in make-believe. New leaves on the trees shimmer golden light, and birds fly in the sky and sing with all their might. Sunlight shines like powdered gold forever on our days of old, and stories waiting to unfold of my deep valley home. When we first climbed up the hill in search of dreams we could fulfill, we never knew that we would still be building memories. We'd walk down the secret lane in a pink dress with a satin train, trying to please the King of Spain so we could be the Queen. We would live in the mirror room and cross the ridge where the wild roses bloom, thinking to the golden dawn as the sun dried off the lawn, said these days would soon be gone of my deep valley home. Twilight spread a purple glow over a field of drifted snow. We looked on houses far below and wandered in a dream. Then the springtime hill awoke and melted snow rushed down the slope. We built sailboats full of hope and sent them down the stream. But when the years have grown old, darkness brings November cold, there will be stories to be told of my deep valley home.
Hello, my name is Mrs. Benson, and today I am going to be reading from Betsy-Tacy, Chapter 10, and the name of this chapter is called Calling on Mrs. Benson. When summertime came, Betsy and Tacy didn't need to bother with school anymore. They could play all day long. They did play all day long, and they never once ran out of things to do. The days aren't long enough for those two, Betsy's mother used to say to Betsy's father. That was true, although it was strange, for a day was very long. A day filled all the hours which it took the sun to wheel from behind the White House on the big hill across the vast blue spaces of the sky to the trees down behind Tacy's barn. By the time evening came and Betsy and Tacy were playing games with the other Hill Street children, not made-up games, but real games like pom-pom pull away and run, sheep, run, they could hardly remember the cool morning hours when they had the world to themselves. But in all the long golden time in between, they never ran out of games to play. One of their favorite games was dressing up. They loved to dress up in grown-up clothes and go calling. One day, Betsy's mother let her dress up in an old tan lace dress. It was a beautiful dress with a big pink rose in the front. Betsy poked an old tablecloth underneath her skirts and began to make a bustle like her mother's. And she wore an old hat of her mother's, a round hat with a veil. Tacy wore a striped blue and green silk dress of her grown-up sister Mary's, her curls pinned high, and she wore a big hat covered with flowers. And Mary let her carry her parasol, which was pink with ruffles around it. Have you seen a parasol? I'm going to show you a parasol. This is a parasol that's pink with ruffles around it. And ladies would carry these, or girls would carry these to keep the sun out of their eyes. Para means for and sol means sun. So a parasol is a sun umbrella because they didn't have sunglasses and they didn't have sunscreen. Parasols are lots of fun. When Tacy was given the parasol, she and Betsy raced back to Betsy's house. "Mama," cried Betsy, "Tacy has a parasol. May I carry your parasol?" "No," said Betsy's mother, "but you may carry my card case." And she got it from the bureau drawer. And here I have a card case. One side was filled with cards which said Mrs. Robert Ray, and a little lace-edged handkerchief smelling of violet perfume peeked out of the other side. Betsy's mother carried this case when she went calling. She left a card at every house. Betsy took the card case and Tacy opened the parasol and they started down Hill Street. So they called on Mrs. Benson, that's me. She was very glad to see them. "Come right in," she said. "How are you, Mrs. Ray? How do you do, Mrs. Kelly?" She pretended that they were their mothers instead of Betsy and Tacy. Of course, that was the right thing to do. "Sit right down," she said. They sat down on the sofa. "It's lovely weather we're having." "Yes, isn't it?" said Betsy in a very grown-up tone. Tacy didn't talk much. She was bashful. "I hear you bought some sand, Mrs. Benson," said Betsy in a grown-up tone. "Yes, I did. Would you like to see it?" asked Mrs. Benson. And she went to her desk and brought out 2 bottles full of sand, which Betsy and Tacy had colored. The perfume bottle with the blue-collared stopper and the big fat jar. I wish I had those with me, but I don't have them with me today. "Mercy, what beautiful sand," said Betsy. "Isn't it?" said Mrs. Benson. "I bought it from 2 little girls named Betsy and Tacy." Tacy looked up then, her blue eyes dancing in Mrs. Benson's. "I know those little girls," she said. "I thought maybe you did," said Mrs. Benson. After a minute, Mrs. Benson asked, "Wouldn't you like some tea?" "Tea?" asked Betsy, so surprised that she forgot to talk like her mother. "Afternoon tea," explained Mrs. Benson. "What ladies drink when they go calling." "Oh, of course," said Betsy. "I'd love some. Wouldn't you, Tacy?" So Mrs. Benson gave them some tea. Cambric tea, she called it, and it was delicious. Have a little sip of cambric tea. And I think we'll be sharing that recipe sometime soon. So Mrs. Benson gave them tea, cambric tea, she called it, and it was delicious. They had cookies with their tea, and Betsy and Tacy nibbled them daintily, but they ate them to the very last crumb. When the cookies were gone, Betsy said, "Well, I'm afraid we'll have to be going. Goodbye, Mrs. Benson." "Goodbye, Mrs. Ray," said Mrs. Benson. "Goodbye, Mrs. Benson," said Tacy, not bashful anymore. "Goodbye, Mrs. Kelly. May I help you open your parasol?" Then Betsy remembered the card case. "And I must leave you a card. Here's a card for me and one for Tacy." Betsy and Tacy went on down Hill Street. "Who shall we call on next?" said Tacy. "I know. We'll call at the chocolate-colored house." So they went on down Hill Street to the corner and through the vacant lot. It was further than they had ever gone before in grown-up clothes. They held their long skirts high so the weeds and bushes wouldn't tear them. They came to the chocolate-colored house. "Tacy," said Betsy, "I never yet saw anybody around this chocolate-colored house." "Neither did I," said Tacy. They looked at it a moment before they climbed to the door. It sat like a big, plump chocolate drop on the big, square corner lot. There weren't many trees around it, just a green lawn with flower beds on either side of the white cement walk which led to the porch steps. Betsy and Tacy walked up that walk and climbed the porch steps. They rang the bell and waited. While they were waiting, they looked around. The tower jutted right out in front of the porch. It had windows on it, but all the shades were pulled down. The pane of colored glass over the front window shone ruby red in the sunlight. No one answered their ring, and Betsy and Tacy rang the bell again. They rang it again and again. At last, the lady next door came out of her house. She looked busy and cross. What are you doing on that? What are you doing on that porch, little girls? We're ringing the bell, said Betsy. We've come to call. Tell her about the card case, whispered Tacy. But before Betsy could speak again, the lady said, well, the people who live there aren't home. They've gone to Milwaukee. She went back into the house and shut the door. Milwaukee, said Betsy. Milwaukee, said Tacy. They liked the sound of that word. I wish I could go to Milwaukee, said Betsy. What's it like? Oh, it's lovely, said Betsy. Milwaukee, Milwaukee. She said the name over and over. While we walk home, she said to Tacy, I'll make up a poem about it. Betsy liked to make up poems. First, we must leave a card, though, said Tacy. Of course, said Betsy. So they opened the card case, and they took out a card and put it in the mailbox. Mrs. Robert Ray, it said on the card. They took another and left that one too. The second one was from Tacy. While they walked home, Betsy made up a poem about Milwaukee. It went like this. There's a place named Milwaukee, 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 Milwaukee. There's a place named Milwaukee, Milwaukee. It's a beautiful place to be. I wish I could go to Milwaukee with Tacy a hold of my hand. I wish I could go to Milwaukee. It sounds like the Beulah land. That's a nice poem, said Tacy. I like the part about me. So they sang it together, making up a tune. They sang it all the way through the vacant lot. And just at the edge of the vacant lot, they saw Betsy's father, who was driving home for supper. He wasn't driving a horseless carriage like just went by. He was driving old Meg, the horse, and had just slowed down for the Hill Street Hill. Stop! Wait! Give us a ride, cried Betsy and Tacy. They picked up their long skirts and began to run. Why, how do you do, Mrs. Vanderbilt, said Betsy's father. How do you do, Mrs. Astor? He stopped old Meg and cramped the wheel of the buggy, and Betsy and Tacy climbed in. Betsy took the reins, and Tacy held the whip. Julia and Katie were watching from the steps of the Ray house. Giddy up, said Betsy. Whoa, said Tacy. They drove in triumph around the little road which led to old Meg's barn.
But when the years have grown old and darkness brings November cold, there will be stories to be told of my deep